The rain pounded against the windshield as Mark sat frozen in his car, her words echoing in his mind. "I love you, idiot. I've loved you for years." How could he have missed it? All those moments, all those little gestures, they suddenly played before his eyes like a movie he was seeing for the first time. Ella had been there all along, right in front of him, and he'd been too blind, too afraid, too consumed by his responsibilities to see what was right in front of him. Now, as her tear-streaked face haunted his thoughts, he had to decide if he was brave enough to finally take a chance on love again. If you're enjoying this emotional journey, please take a second to hit that like button and subscribe to our channel for more heartfelt stories that remind us it's never too late to find love again. Your support helps us continue sharing these powerful narratives that touch the soul. Mark Davis had mastered the art of functional chaos. At 42, he'd spent the last 8 years raising his daughter Sophie alone after his wife Lisa's death from cancer. Their modest 3-bedroom home in Cedar Springs had become command central for a life that revolved around school schedules, soccer practice, homework, and the constant struggle to be both mother and father to a girl who was now 15 and navigating the treacherous waters of adolescence. The kitchen counter displayed the evidence of their morning routine: half-empty coffee mug, Sophie's abandoned toast crust, permission slips needing signatures, and bills that never seemed to end. Mark stared at the scattered papers, tugging at his slightly overgrown dark hair, another thing on his perpetual to-do list. "Dad! Have you seen my blue hoodie? The one with the silver stars? I need it for Jenna's birthday thing tonight." Sophie's voice carried down the stairs, that familiar mix of teenage urgency and exasperation that had become the soundtrack to their home. "Laundry room, second shelf." Mark called back, having done the laundry at midnight after finishing a project for work. As a freelance graphic designer, he had the flexibility to be there for Sophie, but it meant late nights catching up once she was asleep. The thundering of Sophie's feet down the stairs announced her arrival. She appeared in the kitchen doorway, hoodie in hand, her dark hair, so much like her mother's, pulled back in a messy bun. "You're the best," she said, giving him a quick side hug before diving into the refrigerator. "Is Ella coming over to help with the Henderson proposal tonight?" Mark nodded, gathering the breakfast dishes. "Yeah, she said she'd be here around 7. You'll be at Jenna's by then, right?" "Uh-huh." "Dad?" Sophie paused, studying him with an intensity that made him uncomfortable. "You know Ella's like, really pretty, right?" Mark nearly dropped a plate. "What?" "I mean, yes, she's attractive, but she's my business partner, sophomore." Sophie rolled her eyes dramatically. "Oh my God, Dad. You are so clueless sometimes." Before he could respond, Sophie was already racing back upstairs, leaving Mark confused and slightly flustered. Ella Ramirez had been his business partner for 3 years now. They'd met at a marketing conference when Mark was struggling to expand his freelance design business after Lisa's death. Ella, with her background in content marketing and client relations, had complemented his design skills perfectly. Together, they'd built Davis and Ramirez Design into a successful small agency with a growing list of clients. Yes, Ella was attractive, that was an objective fact. With her warm brown eyes, infectious laugh, and the way she could charm even the most difficult clients, anyone would notice her beauty. But Mark had carefully maintained professional boundaries. After Lisa, he'd focused all his energy on Sophie and building a stable life for them. Romance wasn't part of the equation. The morning proceeded with its usual rush, finding Sophie's missing shoe, reminding her about her math test on Monday, and making sure she had money for dinner with her friends. By the time he dropped her off at school, Mark was already mentally organizing the day's client work. Earth to Mark. "Where'd you go?" Ella's voice pulled him back to the present. They were sitting in their small shared office space downtown, surrounded by concept boards for the Henderson Sporting Goods campaign. "Sorry, just thinking about Sophie's schedule next week. Parent-teacher conferences and soccer tournament all in the same 3 days." He rubbed his eyes, suddenly aware he'd been staring blankly at his computer screen. Ella's expression softened. "You're doing too much again. Let me take some of this workload. I can finish the Henderson mock-ups while you focus on the Bradshaw website revisions." "You don't have to do that," Mark protested. "I know I don't have to. I want to." Ella moved her chair closer, her floral perfume, something subtle with notes of jasmine, briefly distracting him. "That's what partners are for." Something in her emphasis on the word partners made Mark glance up. She was looking at him with an expression he couldn't quite read, her dark hair falling around her shoulders. For a moment, he felt a strange flutter in his chest that he immediately suppressed. "Thanks, Ella. I owe you," he said, returning to his safe professional tone. "Add it to my tab," she replied with a small smile, but he noticed it didn't quite reach her eyes. Throughout the day, Mark caught Ella watching him several times, quickly looking away when he noticed. Once, when he handed her a coffee, 2 sugars, splash of almond milk, just how she liked it, their fingers brushed, and he could have sworn she let the contact linger. He dismissed these observations as imagination. Ella was kind and thoughtful, that's just who she was. At 6, they packed up to continue working at Mark's house as planned. "I'll pick up dinner on the way," Ella offered. "The usual from Golden Dragon?" "You know me too well," Mark smiled, gathering his laptop. "Do I?" she asked quietly, and there was something in her tone that made him look up, but she was already heading for the door, leaving him wondering what she meant. When Ella arrived at his house that evening, she brought not just their regular Chinese food order but also a bottle of the red wine he'd mentioned liking months ago. She'd remembered. She always remembered the little things. "I figured we could use this after we finished the proposal," she explained, setting it on the kitchen counter. "Unless you had other plans for tonight?" "No, no plans," Mark said, suddenly aware of how pathetic that sounded. "I mean, Sophie's at her friend's until tomorrow, so..." "So, it's just us," Ella finished, and there was a weight to her words that hung in the air between them. They worked in the living room, spreading their materials across the coffee table as they'd done countless times before. But tonight, something felt different. Mark couldn't help noticing how Ella tucked her legs underneath her on the couch, how she absently twisted a strand of hair around her finger when concentrating, how her laughter seemed to fill the empty spaces in his home. After 2 hours of productive work, they finally wrapped up the proposal. "I think Henderson will love this," Ella said triumphantly, closing her laptop. "We make a good team, Davis." "The best, Ramirez," he agreed, reaching for the wine she'd brought. "Shall we celebrate?" As they settled on the couch with their glasses, Mark felt more relaxed than he had in months. The house was quiet except for the soft jazz playing from the speaker. Ella had put it on earlier, knowing his taste in music. "How's Sophie doing with everything?" "High school is rough," Ella asked, tucking her feet under her. Mark sighed. "She's doing okay. Better than I was at 15, that's for sure. But sometimes I worry she's missing out by not having a mom around. There are things I just don't know how to help her with." "You're doing an amazing job with her, Mark," Ella said softly. "Lisa would be so proud of both of you." At the mention of his late wife, Mark felt the familiar pang, but it was different now, more distant, like an old photograph fading gently with time. "Thanks. It's been 8 years, but sometimes it feels like yesterday." Other times?" "Other times?" Ella prompted when he trailed off. Mark took a sip of wine, gathering his thoughts. "Other times it feels like another lifetime. I look at Sophie, and I see Lisa in her smile, in the way she laughs. But our life now is so different from what we had then. Sometimes I feel guilty for that, for moving forward." Ella shifted closer, her knee now touching his. "Moving forward doesn't mean forgetting, Mark. Lisa will always be part of who you are, part of Sophie. But she would want you both to be happy, to have full lives." "I know you're right," he admitted. Sophie said something funny this morning, actually. She called me clueless. Teenagers, Ella chuckled. What prompted that assessment? Mark hesitated, suddenly unsure if he should share this part. She mentioned that you were pretty. I told her you were my business partner, and she just rolled her eyes like I was missing something obvious. The room seemed to still. Ella's expression changed subtly, her eyes searching his. And what do you think about that? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. About what? Mark asked, genuinely confused. Ella set her wine glass down, a flash of frustration crossing her face. About what Sophie said. About me being pretty. About us being just business partners. Mark felt suddenly out of his depth, like he'd wandered into deep water without realizing it. Ella, you're beautiful, anyone can see that. And you're my best friend, not just my business partner. I don't know what. God, Mark. Ella stood up abruptly, pacing to the window. How can someone so perceptive about everyone else be so blind about what's right in front of him? Mark set his own glass down, completely lost now. What are you talking about? Ella turned to face him, and he was startled to see tears forming in her eyes. 3 years, Mark. 3 years I've been right here. I've brought you coffee every morning, exactly how you like it. I've rearranged my schedule countless times to help with Sophie when she was sick or when you had conflicting appointments. I've sat through every one of her soccer games with you. I've listened to you talk about Lisa, about your fears for Sophie, about everything. That's what friends do, Mark said weakly, standing now too, feeling as though something monumental was happening but unable to grasp it fully. Friends, Ella repeated, the word sounding hollow. Is that really all you think this is? All you think we are? I don't understand, Mark said, though a part of him was beginning to, a realization dawning slowly like a sunrise he'd been too busy to notice. Last Christmas, when I gave you that vintage camera you'd been eyeing for months? The one you said reminded you of the one your grandfather had? When I cook your favorite meal on your birthday every year without you having to ask? When I call to check on you after Sophie leaves for weekends with her grandparents because I know you get lonely in this empty house? Ella's voice was rising, emotion breaking through. Those aren't just friendly gestures, Mark. Mark stood frozen, memories flooding back, Ella bringing homemade soup when he had the flu, the way she always touched his arm when she laughed at his jokes, how she remembered every story he'd ever told her about Lisa and treated those memories with such gentle reverence. The look in her eyes when she thought he wasn't watching. I didn't realize, he stammered, the ground seeming to shift beneath his feet. No, you didn't, Ella said, tears now flowing freely down her cheeks. Because you decided after Lisa died that your heart was closed for business. And I respected that, I really did. I never pushed. I just hoped that eventually you'd see me. Really see me. Ella, Do you know what Sophie said to me last month when I helped her with her history project? She asked me if I was in love with you. A 15-year-old could see it, Mark. Everyone can see it. Mark took a step toward her, his heart racing. What did you tell her? Ella wiped furiously at her tears. I told her the truth. That I've been in love with you for years, but that you weren't ready to hear it. The confession hung in the air between them, impossible to take back. Mark felt dizzy with revelation, with the enormity of what he'd missed, what had been right in front of him all this time. I can't do this anymore, Ella continued, her voice breaking. I can't keep pretending I'm okay with just being your friend, your business partner. It's tearing me apart. She moved toward the door, grabbing her coat. I think I need some time away from. No. Mark moved quickly, reaching for her hand before she could leave. Please, don't go. Not like this. Ella stopped, but didn't turn around. Why should I stay, Mark? Give me one good reason. Because I'm an idiot, he said, his voice thick with emotion. Because I've been so afraid of feeling anything again that I couldn't see what was happening. Because the thought of you walking out that door right now is terrifying me in a way I haven't let myself feel in 8 years. Ella turned slowly to face him, her expression guarded, vulnerable. What are you saying? Mark took a deep breath, finally allowing himself to recognize the truth that had been growing in his heart. I'm saying that when I imagine my future, Sophie's graduation, her wedding someday, holidays, ordinary Tuesdays, you're there. You've been there in my mind all along. I just didn't let myself acknowledge what that meant. Ella shook her head, fresh tears falling. Don't say these things just to make me stay. Don't. I'm not, Mark insisted, taking another step closer. Ella, when Lisa died, I thought that part of my life was over. I put everything into being a dad, into work. I didn't think I deserved another chance. But you snuck past all my defenses. You became essential to me, to Sophie. The best part of every day is seeing you walk through the office door with that smile. A small, reluctant smile tugged at Ella's lips despite her tears. Keep talking, she whispered. Mark reached out tentatively, brushing a tear from her cheek. I'm terrified right now. Terrified that I've realized too late. Terrified of risking our friendship, our business. Terrified of letting myself love someone again and potentially losing them. But I'm more terrified of letting you walk away believing I don't care about you as more than a friend. Ella's breath caught. And do you? Care about me as more than a friend? Mark nodded slowly, finally allowing himself to speak the truth. I think I've been falling in love with you for years, Ella. I just didn't know how to recognize it anymore. You think? She challenged, her eyes never leaving his. No, Mark corrected himself, taking her hand in his. I know. I love you, Ella. I love the way you hum when you're concentrating. I love how you always cry at dog food commercials. I love how you've become Sophie's confidant. I love your passion and your kindness and your patience, God, your patience with me. For a moment, they stood there, hands clasped, the air charged with possibility. Then Ella let out a sound somewhere between a laugh and a sob. I love you, idiot, she said, echoing her earlier outburst but softer now, with affection overriding frustration. I've loved you for years. Mark did the only thing that made sense, he pulled her gently toward him and kissed her. It was tentative at first, then deepening as 8 years of grief and fear and loneliness began to dissolve in the warmth of this new beginning. Ella's arms wrapped around his neck, holding him close as though afraid he might change his mind. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Mark rested his forehead against hers. I'm sorry it took me so long to catch up, he whispered. You got there eventually, she replied, her smile radiant through the remnants of tears. That's all that matters. Later that night, as they sat talking for hours on the couch, hands intertwined, planning and dreaming and figuring out how to navigate this new territory, Mark felt something he hadn't expected, peace. Not the resigned quiet he'd settled for after Lisa, but a genuine sense of rightness, of coming home. When Sophie returned the next day, finding them making breakfast together in the kitchen, she took one look at their linked hands and broke into a grin so wide it lit up her entire face. Finally, she exclaimed, dropping her overnight bag dramatically. I thought I was going to have to make PowerPoint slides or something to show Dad what was right in front of his face. Ella laughed, the sound filling the kitchen. Your dad got there all on his own. With a little help, Mark admitted, squeezing Ella's hand. Sophie looked between them, her expression softening. Mom would be happy, you know. She always told me she wanted you to find love again someday. Mark felt his throat tighten with emotion. She did? Sophie nodded. Before she got really sick. She made me promise to help you when the time came. I think she'd approve of my choice, she added with a mischievous smile at Ella. As Sophie grabbed a piece of toast and began chattering about her sleepover, Mark caught Ella's eye across the kitchen. In her gaze, he saw everything he'd been too afraid to hope for: understanding, patience, passion, and most of all, love that had waited quietly until he was ready to see it. Sometimes the signs are all around us, pointing toward happiness we don't believe we deserve. It takes courage to recognize them, to step out of the safety of what we know and risk our hearts again. For Mark, that courage came in a moment of potential loss, when Ella was walking out the door, teaching him that sometimes we need to lose our fear of being hurt again before we can find our way back to love. And sometimes, we need someone to love us enough to finally shout the truth through tears, forcing us to see what's been there all along. 3 years later, on their wedding day, with Sophie serving as maid of honor, Mark would include these words in his vows: "Thank you for loving me enough to never give up, even when I was too blind to see what was right in front of me. Thank you for yelling 'I love you, idiot' when I needed to hear it most." Because sometimes, love isn't just patient and kind, sometimes love is brave enough to finally demand to be seen.